Welcome to another episode of MedTalk. We have distinguished expert physician Dr. Robert G. Lahita with us today. Dr. Lahita is a chairman of medicine at the St. Joseph Healthcare System and also the academic chair at both the Patterson and Wayne locations in New Jersey. He is also a professor of medicine at New York Medical College and clinical professor at Rutgers Medical School. Dr. Lahita is the author of or editor of 14 books and 140 scientific peer-reviewed papers and is a master of the American College of Rheumatology, fellow of the American College of Physicians, and fellow of the Royal College of Physicians. Welcome, Dr. Lahita, to MedTalk on our continued discussion of current state of pandemic.
Thank you. Great to be with you, Dr. Patel.
Thank you so much. So let me start. I'm going to start with giving some numbers to our viewers. That is, as of now, we have close to 28 million cases and more than 490,000 deaths in the USA since the pandemic began last year. Yes. Although number of new cases, hospitalizations, and death rates are in a downward trend right now for the last few weeks, which is a good news. But can you tell us where are we heading? Where are we standing right now with this pandemic, and where are we heading?
Well, I'm hoping we don't get to 600,000 deaths, which is what has been suggested by June 1st. We are trying to immunize, according to the Biden administration, 2 million people a day. That has been a problem. Right now, it's 1.7 million people a day that are being immunized. And we are still seeing infections. The infections are quite severe. And with the variants that have been described, both the British variant, which is the B1117, and the South African variant, both are very, very infectious and may cause a rise in the affected individuals as we go forward. We're very concerned about that. There's been a big effort from Washington now to set up genomic study centers in the country. Upwards of, Britain, the UK has roughly the ability to look at 30% of the infected cases to see if there are genomic variation, meaning the mutants, the variants. Now, with regard to us, we're only able to look at 0.3 to 0.5%, 0.3 and 0.5%. And the government would like to see if we can identify and study upwards of 50% of those infected in the country, looking at the variants, because that would be very, very important. And I'm sure you're going to ask me about the differences in vaccines and all that.
Yes, absolutely. So what is your biggest concern right now with this pandemic, mutations and the new variants coming from the UK, South Africa, and Brazil? What other things are concerning?
Well, number one, easier transmission between individuals, because this particular variant seems to be more infective. And I don't know whether it's because of the alterations of the chemistry and stereochemistry of the spike protein that allows it to bind more assiduously to the H2 receptor in the sinuses, the eyes, and the mouth. So all the more reason to wear a mask or a double mask or an N95 mask when you're in public. So that's number one. Is the infectivity or as Dr. Fauci at the NIH said, the reinfectious reactivity of people who are vaccinated, can they have a viral load that's big enough to infect others, even though they themselves are not affected? So that's another or a second concern. And thirdly, is that the variants seem to prefer young people more than the the original coronavirus variant, or I guess they're all variants in a way. So the mutation is of some concern, and there's been an uptick. Even though the total numbers are going down, there seems to be more young people that are affected. And of course, it all comes down to the immunogenetics of the individual. Because you can be a very healthy person, an athlete, a lacrosse player, whatever, and get infected, and whatever your immunogenetics happens to be could determine whether you survive or die from this coronavirus or its variants.
Very good explanation, Dr. Lahita. So let's move on to the discussion on currently available vaccines in the USA. So I just want to throw some numbers here. So as of now, 72 million vaccines have been distributed in the USA and 56 million administered. What are the challenges do you see currently, and the way we are heading now will take at least until fall to vaccinate those who want to get vaccine? What can you tell us, our viewers, about the vaccination logistics in the USA? Are we on the right trend at this point? Is only 5% of the individuals currently fully vaccinated. What can you tell us, the viewers?
Well, the goal, of course, is to get people vaccinated so we have herd immunity. Now, herd immunity is going to require that 75% of the population be vaccinated or 75% of the population infected. And this is a big issue because only 10% of the population currently are immunized, which is not anywhere near the number of people we would like to see. And at this rate, unless the number of vaccinations goes up significantly on a daily basis, we are going to take beyond the fall and maybe into 2022 before we have herd immunity. And nobody wants to hear that because the disruption of life has been so significant, among all of the populations, and all of the people of the country are kind of fatigued by wearing masks, washing their hands, social distancing, inability to go to dinners, eat in restaurants, etc. No matter how much relief there is with regard to the lockdown, there's still a sizable population of people who remain possibly infected. And hence the death rate, even though it's depressed slightly, can go up precipitously in a very short time. And that's a big concern for everybody. I'm very concerned about that. And I want to make sure as many people get vaccinated as possible. But as you know, roughly 50% of the population doesn't want to even think about getting vaccinated.
Yeah, so that will be the next question. But before we move on to the next question, the question I have right now, so the US spent close to $23 billion for the Operation Warp Speed to develop this vaccine and send it to different places. Where are we lacking? What is the issue here?
Logistics. Logistics of distribution of the vaccine. It's almost impossible to make it as fast as we need it. And back in November of last year, I remember saying that we probably wouldn't be up to speed with numbers of distributed vaccines until April. Now, the two first vaccines, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine, came out fairly quickly before Christmas. And all of us on the front lines, myself included, were immunized very, very quickly at the beginning of January. And I think my second shot was at the end of January. So my doctors and nurses here were all immunized, and that is a very good thing. But there's a fair percentage of nurses that refuse to be immunized, and respiratory therapists, for that matter, did not want to be immunized. And that's, of course, their right. It's not mandated, even though some people say it should be mandated to be immunized. And some companies are doing that. I saw a report today of a young lady who was fired because she refused to be immunized. I think that may be a bit draconian, but, with a little bit more leadership from the federal government and some words from the president of the United States, it might cause more people to be vaccinated if they felt that the vaccine was perfectly safe, which it is.
So the question I have is, so there is so much information and rumors about the safety of the vaccine on the social media and many other platforms. Many have doubts and concern to take the vaccine. So can you please tell our viewers and clear the doubts about the vaccine and why everyone should take the vaccine?
Right. Well, let's look at the different kinds of vaccines. I think you need to know that. First, two vaccines that were brought to us was a new methodology, which is very, very safe. And that was involving a synthesized strand of messenger RNA. Messenger RNA is a molecule that is exactly identical to that which is in the center of the virus. This is a big RNA molecule in this coronavirus. We made that RNA to express itself in yours and my cells. So when you get injected with this RNA, which is very labile, by the way, the RNA doesn't stay around very long, hence the need for low temperatures. I work with RNA in the laboratory, and we had to, glove our hands, wear hoods, make sure you didn't have anything on your face, etc. It's a very delicate molecule. So it gets injected in a little nanoparticle made of protein and fat. And that's injected, and it gets engulfed by the cells of the immune system and your other cells. And it synthesizes in the cytoplasm, that's the outside of the nucleus of the cell, spike proteins. And they're on the surface then of the cell, just as though it were infected with a virus. But this is not the virus. This is just a particle of the virus. And then you make an immune response. Your immune system thinks that you've been infected with COVID. And so the immune response is wonderful, because first thing you do is get antibodies, and you get a cellular response, which I call a T lymphocyte response. I talk about that, but nobody else talks about that. That's even more potent than the antibody response. So that's with the messenger RNA. And then the viral vector vaccines, which is the Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, Oxford vaccines, which are either approved in Europe and coming to the States. These vaccines, which have plus or minus activity against the variant, but certainly about 60% activity versus 90% for the Moderna and the Pfizer, roughly 60% protective nature for the coronavirus infection. And the viral vector is using an adenovirus, which is a harmless virus, to carry the RNA into the body and into the cell. So it's very similar to messenger RNA virus. The difference is it uses an adenovirus, a well-known virus, which infects you and is very efficient in making your cells think that they have been infected with the coronavirus. Now, I said very subtly that the Moderna and Pfizer viruses were 90% effective. AstraZeneca and I believe the J&J vaccine, which I don't know the infectivity numbers, were about 50 to 60%. Well, to give you an example, the influenza virus, which we get every year, the influenza vaccine is only 30 to 40% effective. So the AstraZeneca and the J&J vaccines are very effective. The bottom line is you're dealing with a very, very good vaccine. And I've been told that the J&J, the Johnson & Johnson viral vector vaccine, is also very effective against the South African variant. AstraZeneca, not so much, but the J&J is. And the good news about the J&J is it can be given at room temperature. It doesn't have to be frozen.
And only one dose. Is that correct?
That's a good point. Only one dose. That's right. Which a lot of people don't like, the fact that they have to come back for a second dose, which, by the way, in the last 3 days, I've had a lot of questions from people, public questions. I was on NBC News yesterday, and they took in a couple of questions. And one lady said to me, well, I can't get my Moderna second injection on day 28 because I have to go to a wedding or something across the country. And she was very anxious over that. And I said, look, the immune system doesn't have a stop clock. It doesn't say, oh, my gosh, after 28 days, not going to work anymore. You can get the vaccine upwards of 6 weeks, 8 weeks. And if you're really pushed, you can get the second shot at 12 weeks. And it will still work as a booster because the immune system's got great recognition, and I say great memory, but a lot of scientists say, well, don't call it memory, call it recognition. But in my way of thinking, it's a memory. So it's good. As long as you get the second booster, your immune system will be really primed, and it's very effective. So the other vaccines that there are the protein-bound vaccines, which is like Novavax, and I've got about 6 or 7 of them. And then you've got the whole virus vaccine that's like the influenza vaccine, which is like a weakened virus vaccine, where the weakened virus or synthetic virus is injected into you. This is actually, the whole virus vaccine is the Sinovac vaccine, which is a Chinese vaccine. And there are a couple of them that come out of China that are Sinovac, which are whole viruses, which they've been using since the pandemic started. It's an inactivated version of the coronavirus to promote an immune response. As far as I know, they have not been available to us in the United States. In Russia, the Sputnik 5 vaccine, I believe, and I'm not certain of this, could be a whole virus vaccine. That's why they were ready almost immediately to inject their people with that vaccine. Of course, they have no clinical data that it works, but that never stopped them before, and they're administering the vaccine. And I guess the probability of it working is fairly large.
Wonderful information, Dr. Lahita. So one question I have is regarding the J&J and AstraZeneca vaccine. Do you believe that if those vaccines are approved for the emergency use authorization, is that going to be a game changer in the USA?
Well, certainly with the numbers that will be distributed, it will add and be a game changer. And remember, all we need is immune response, whether it's through the viral vectors, which is the AstraZeneca, J&J, or the messenger RNA delivery vaccines. They will cause an uptick in immune response. Neutralizing antibody, regardless of which vaccine you get, will be there. And that's good enough to begin herd immunity. Because that's what the Salk vaccine was years ago.
Yes.
For polio. It was a whole virus vaccine and attenuated, and we had herd immunity, and people stopped getting polio in a matter of months. And if you are old enough to remember that, it was a big scourge. And these vaccines are very safe these days. So
Yes.
they were even safer than they were back in the 50s.
So the mRNA technology, the vaccines developed by the Pfizer and the Moderna, that is not something new, right? It has been in the research for many years.
It's very safe. In fact, there are DNA vaccines, and this is an RNA vaccine. And as I mentioned, the RNA is very delicate, it's very labile, but that's what the virus has in it. It has a big RNA molecule that causes in the cytoplasm, or the outer layer of the cell, it replicates itself using your own cell's machinery, and it produces many copies. It's sort of like a copy machine in each of your cells. Initially, you get the first copy that goes in, and then it makes thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of copies of these little viruses that appear on the surface. And it's the spike protein of this virus that's the protein that sticks out, that makes the antibody response. Yeah.
So between now and until we reach 75, 80% develop the herd immunity, what steps can we take to stay safe and save lives and to end this pandemic?
Well, obviously, herd immunity is number one. Vaccination of everyone that can be or will be vaccinated is critical. And I think Israel has shown that. I understand almost 80% of the population have been immunized, except the very, very religious people, which was a big story today, refused to be vaccinated. So the vaccination, induction of herd immunity. The second thing is to continue mitigating. That means wearing a mask, which I have here, wearing a mask and an N95, washing my hands with frequency, considering everything radioactive that you touch. And so it's important not to touch your face, your eyes, and just wash your hands. Stay socially distanced away from other people who you do not know. They may be carriers of the virus. And if they are, they could infect you and themselves be asymptomatic, which means no symptoms. They may not have a fever, they might not have anything, and yet they harbor the virus. So that's what you have to be careful about. And then that's about it, to mitigate and to really induce the vaccination with herd immunity going forward. That will close down this virus replication and close it. It's always going to be with us. I have the feeling that this infection is going to become endemic. That means every year.
It's just like influenza. Yeah.
It's like influenza where there's mutations, and every year we will have to have a variation of the vaccine. But nevertheless, it will not infect huge numbers of population like it does now.
So as an expert, when do you expect changes in our routine life from the current pandemic to new normal, with like we used to have pre-pandemic state? When can we get together and have a social gathering?
Oh boy, well that's the toughest question you ask, because I think it's not going to happen until September or October of this year. If then, it may take, and people will be frightened, they'll be fatigued, there'll have to be ample proof that it's safe to come out of your house,
Yes.
that it's safe to go into restaurants, that it's safe to go to the movie theaters. More than whatever it is prescribed in the state of New York, it's 25% or 50% occupancy in restaurants instead of 100%. There'll be no crowds. In order for that to happen, concert halls, opera, churches, temples, in order for that to really become very populated and robust, I think it's going to take until the end of September, beginning of October, maybe even November. Certainly by next Christmas, I would hope we're back to normal. By
Wonderful.
next, that would be wonderful.
Yes, thank you for that wonderful information, Dr. Lahita. So what is your take-home message for our viewers? What do you want to tell them between now and until we reach that herd immunity?
Okay, I want to tell them, number one, the vaccines are very safe. They have to go through so much scrutiny. Most people don't know, but each company has its own review board that looks at the data over and over again. And I know that they do something called scrub the data. They make sure it's all pure and all truth. Then it goes to the advisory committee of the Food and Drug Administration. That board that is looked at, it looks at the same data, goes over it, and then and only then do they call together the advisory experts to sit in an FDA 2-day session, which reviews with presentation after presentation from scientists the safety and the data showing that the vaccine works. So 3 major screening committees. And then even after that, the virus is released and found to be perfectly safe. So it has to go through this major process. So emergency use authorization is a big deal because it accelerates all of these screening panels so that everyone gets a chance to see the data. How does the virus work? What are the side effects? It's testing over 50 to 60,000 people per virus compared to placebo, which is a sugar injection. So you've got the virus injection, sugar injection. You have 50,000 people and 25,000 get the vaccine, 25,000 do not. They get the sugar. And you see who gets infected. And that's what goes on in the phase 3 trial. That's huge. And then when all that data is compiled, thank God for supercomputers, because it requires a lot of computer work, the vaccine is then goes through the Food and Drug Administration and the approval process, which is very, very stringent. I know because I was on an FDA committee, not for vaccines, but for other drugs. And it was amazing the hoops that one has to jump through in order to get something approved, even on an emergency use.
So they waited also 60 days. That's what I heard after the vaccine third clinical trial. Yeah,
that's right. That's right.
Yes. Any other message you want to give it to the viewers before we conclude?
Get your vaccine. It's very safe, and the sooner the better. And I know it logistically, it's a nightmare. And that's largely because it's left up to the states to decide where and when and who to give the vaccine to. But I assure you by April or May, we should be giving it to everybody. There shouldn't be stratification of the elderly, those with comorbidities, et cetera. It's important that they be vaccinated because they're the biggest ones at risk. The last group are children, and children basically nothing, they get infected, but they do not suffer the symptoms and signs that the adults do.
Wonderful information. Thank you, Dr. Lahita, for your time and providing your expertise to IndusTV viewers, and appreciate your dedicated service to medical communities in tri-state and all over the country, actually, and providing education via interviews and seminars during this pandemic. Kudos to you for the job well done. Thank you so much, Dr. Lahita.
Thank you, Dr. Patel. It's great to talk to you.